Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. As you can see by my aggressively unmelanated skin, I'm about as white as bleached bone. And I've become increasingly aware over the past few years of studying environmentalism that us whites seem to have a nasty habit of dominating the conversation around environmental issues. Whether it's how the environmentalist has been viewed aesthetically in the popular imagination as manifesting in your affluent, Prius-driving yuppie recyclers, the traditional heroes of colonizer environmentalist movements, or who tends to disproportionately benefit from environmentalist policies, environmentalism has long been a bit of a white space. In this way, the traditional environmentalist modes are heavily colonial and low-key, high-key white supremacist in their representation and often in their actions. I'm not here to tell you how to recycle better or about my favorite brand of vegan fair trade shoes. The purpose of this video is to outline a few ways that us individuals of the Caucasian persuasion, as well as other folks who may have internalized colonizer tropes, can work on decolonizing our notions of environmentalism. This is the first in a series that I'd like to do on different ways to decolonize the minds and conceptions of my fellow settlers. And I'd love to hear suggestions on different topics that I should consider, so leave a comment below. Now, I can hear some of y'all furiously typing out there telling me that I'm a white savior and that I don't have any room to talk about this, blah blah. If you're white and saying that, meh. If you're not doing your part to help decolonize the minds of our fellow whites, then you're just making noise. If you're black and indigenous and you feel that way, I hear you. I'm well aware of how my status as a hyper-mask, cishet white is a bit of a historically oppressive construction. If you see a way that I can improve my approach or my ideas, please let me know in the comments below. However, the way that I see it is that the people that look like me are the best qualified to talk to the other people that look like me. For better or for worse, persuadable people tend to prefer messengers that remind them of themselves. And as I'm sure that y'all have noticed, we've got a bit of a white problem out here. Therefore, it is my belief that us whiteys need to do way more than our fair share of deconstructing oppressive beliefs and openly challenging them in the public sphere. I also recognize that decolonization in the literal sense of abolishing the US government and giving 100% of the land back to the indigenous isn't going to happen anytime soon. But decolonization starts in our minds. I've become increasingly interested in realizing and unpacking all of our different implicitly colonial modes and ideas and how they affect our society and our interactions. So, these videos represent the beginning of that massive project. Also, this is definitely something you're going to hear me say again elsewhere, but let it be known that my intention here is not to tone police non-white people. I would never presume to be able to tell people that experience way more oppression than I do on a daily basis how to construct or convey their messages. If you feel like I'm doing that, please know that it was not my intention, and feel free to let me know how I can do better. But I am here to be very clear about how my fellow pasty crackers, honkies, yuppies, peckerwoods, and blue-eyed devils can be better at their messaging and their conceptualizing. So with that, let's get to it. Here I am in Muskogee Creek land, living in the so-called United States, in a town bearing an indigenous name. Yet, as far as I know, there are no indigenous people living around here, and there probably haven't been any for a long time. In fact, most of the people around here probably couldn't even tell you what language the name of the town that they live in came from. In addition to, enslaving people, the slaughter of native peoples and the stealing of their land is the original sin of white American culture, and there can be no progress on our collective identity without thinking long and hard about it. Indigenous people in the so-called Americas have been leading by example in terms of their environmental stewardship for a long time. We owe it to them to follow their lead on fighting for the land and to learn from their traditional land management strategies. Indigenous people in the Americas sustainably managed these lands for literally millennia. Indigenous peoples have been fighting for and caring for these lands far longer than us colonizers have. Climate justice is racial justice, And allowing indigenous knowledge and indigenous wisdom to guide our movement is critical to success. Various colonizer notions of environmentalism have either excluded the indigenous, driving them from their lands, romanticized and essentialized them, obviously also really bad, just been downright racist, or impugned them for practicing their traditional subsistence strategies. Stop the whaling! Stop the whaling! All these dang Indians are killing the whales! I may be a settler colonist whose forebears aided in and benefited from genocide and ecocide, and I may be ignoring and supporting industries that are doing way more damage to ocean life than this one small group of people will ever do. But right now, I'm very concerned that these people practicing their traditional subsistence strategies is the biggest possible problem. So, stop doing that, y'all. Learn about active indigenous movements and resistance actions. Volunteer at them if they want you to. Donate to them if they want your donations. Support them. Learn from them. Let them lead. Also, if you live on colonized land, learn about the pre-colonial people that live or lived in your area. Learn whose stolen land you live on. Learn the names of the languages that they spoke. Learn their history. I can pretty much guarantee you that it's going to be super interesting. Like, I was doing this recently and discovered that Alabama is a language. Like, I always thought that it was just the name of America's most racist state, but it's actually a language. It's the name of a language. That's cool. I didn't know that. It's cooler than Alabama, like as a state. Learn about the plants that they ate, that they use for medicine, and how they manage their lands. Learn from them, and honor them, because they haven't gone anywhere. In more traditional environmentalist circles, there's been a tendency to ignore and exclude issues of human equity as unrelated to environmental struggles. Like, think focusing way more on what's happening to the polar bears, and way less focusing on how climate change is devastating poor, often non-white communities. By separating these issues, such organizations are undercutting their stated goals, because people live in the environment, as well as reinforcing a paradigm that humans exist as something that is separate from nature, an idea which is as colonial as the day is long. Thankfully, this has changed a lot in recent years, but it's still a tendency that we need to be aware of. Historically white conservation organizations that have, in the past, disproportionately focused on issues of animal or ecosystem conservation at the expense of black and brown communities contain a certain paternalistic attitude towards nature, by implying that they know what's best for conservation by suggesting that helping out these communities is simply not part of their mission. White environmentalism has long been plagued by Malthusian notions that people, especially poor non-whites, are at the root of environmental degradation. To a degree, they're right, because, the data suggests that people have really been doing a number on the environment lately, but the data also screams that the people doing the most damage are definitely the rich people. But a person or an organization suggesting that an overpopulation of people is an environmental issue usually makes one glaring omission: their own damn self. Look at these pristine lands, unspoiled by the miserable humanity of the locals. What's that? There have been people living here in ecological symbiosis for millennia. Hogwash. Kick them out and make it a national park. We'll name it after me. And this is what is so truly pernicious about these colonizer notions of environmentalism that seek to decouple nature from the people that are living in it. It belies a false objectivity, that the people making these decisions are some sort of rational actors, where we heard that before, who can so clearly see that the environment would be way better if we just removed this entire community of people living in it. By making this judgment, the thinker implies that they are somehow separate from the environment and thus higher than the community they have deemed to be so problematic. This mode of thinking is deeply flawed, because one cannot ever be separated from their environment. There is no human without their environment, and to pretend that is the case is to fall into yet another colonizer environmentalist trope. So, if you're a colonizer environmentalist organization that sees pre-existing communities as being at the root of environmental problems, great. You can start by removing yourself from the environment. Also, if you don't know anything about it, learn about environmental racism. Just go Google that shit right now. Read some books on it. It's real, and addressing it needs to be considered the front line in the fight for climate justice. As I kind of hinted at in the previous section, colonial ideas of nature have left an indelible mark on our interactions with the natural world, as well as our understanding of it. The very concept of nature as something external and definable being one such legacy. This is a major topic, and it's something that I intend to dedicate an entire long video to, so we won't be diving too deeply into it here. But I wouldn't have been able to do these points justice without calling this out. When the mighty crossed the oceans, they brought along some really special shit that nobody ever wanted, like smallpox, white racism, buckle shoes, polka music, skydaddyism, and this supremely f***ed up idea that white people were put on this earth by Skydaddy so that they could dominate the landscape for the glorification of Skydaddy, so then Skydaddy would totally make them his best friend in the golden sky world after they died or some dumb shit like that. Look at all this birth gene, gifted to us by God so that we could exterminate the people that he put here, so that we could enslave some other people that he created, so that we could then use them to decimate the land and the water in the ecosystems that he created, so that we could enrich ourselves, all in his name for the glorification of a sexy, ripped, white Jesus. God damn, it's good to be a Christian. In the United States, we have Manifest Destiny, which I've got to say is some damn good branding for straight genocide. Way to really euphemistically give yourselves a pass on that one, y'all. The notion that the white person is here in these lands by righteous providence, and that angry, jealous Skydaddy totally wants us to enslave people and the earth because it's all his plan, is an idea that is absolutely fundamental to the original conceptual framework of these United States. And central to this concept is that humans, especially white ones, exist separate from nature, and that bending it to our will through violent acts of extraction and oppression is the only way to fulfill Skydaddy's totally real and cool prophecy. This is just an example, but it's a good place to start. Shit all over statues of Cristobal's Columba and realizing all the implicit colonialism in the ideas that he discovered the New World is also a good place to start. Humans are not in any way separate from the natural world, except for in our minds. And the implications of this false dichotomy are far-reaching, all-encompassing, and deeply colonial. Think critically about your interactions with ecological systems and the way that you conceptualize them, especially when it comes to how you see yourself and other humans as being part of the global ecology. Oh, hey. Alright, just gonna briefly touch on this one. But as we're doing this work, there's one easy and tempting little pitfall along the way. Essentializing groups of people. Like, think of this as an updated version of the noble savage trope. This urge, in revering and honoring Black, Indigenous people of color in the fight for climate justice, to then collapse those identities into being essentially that thing, or that they have some essentially redeeming quality that us lowly whites are merely not mortally capable of possessing. Humans are people first, and their identity second. Just because someone fits into your conception of a cultural category doesn't mean that they then inherently possess some magical set of traits. As a sort of mirror image of this phenomenon, I've noticed a tendency in woke spaces among well-meaning whites to essentialize white people and the West as inherently bad. But that then implies that constructed identities perceived to be in opposition to white people are inherently the opposite, which is facile and essentializing. I hate white people, even though I'm white, and all my family and most of my friends are white, and I don't hate them, and all the people that I date are white. But like, I hate white people because like saying that makes me feel like I'm one of the cool non-white people, because like non-white people are like inherently cooler and more virtuous than white people because like white people in Western civilization are just like totally bad. And I see no problem with me making such blanket statements about extremely textured and nuanced histories and identities. And I don't see how me characterizing one group as essentially one thing reinforces colonialist stereotypes and adversarial racial dynamics. And I totally don't see how me making blanket statements like I hate white people has the potential to be taken out of context by people who are like less woke than me, and used by bad faith actors to falsely characterize my politics as essentially anti-white, thereby undercutting my stated goals and making it easier for racist white people to think that Black Lives Matter are the real racists. The construction of whiteness has long been used as a weapon of bigotry, but racism is not something that is unique to white people. We, as the cool white people, must find ways to deconstruct and dismantle systems of white oppression. But we must also resist the temptation to oversimplify its causes, its origins, and our position relative to it. If you are white, performatively distancing yourself from other whites that you have deemed to be less woke, less cultured, and generally lesser than you, does you and your cause no favors. You benefit from the same systems of white oppression that they do, and making yourself out to be better than them only further distances them from realizing the truth that you know in your heart. Your very existence in these lands is predicated on the same amount of black and indigenous blood spilt as them. These are your people. You are not better than them just because you went to liberal arts college and learned a bunch of they've probably never been exposed to. I'm only touching on this here because I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, especially how it relates to like internet politics and SJW ideas of identity, so we're going to keep chipping away at this one elsewhere. But yeah, go ahead and unpack that shit. Alright. This one, probably like the last one, might be a little controversial, but hear me out. You can see me now. I'm white AF. I was born and raised in the United States by the descendants of white settlers. I was surrounded by white people my whole damn life. White people are here and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. That history, as f***ed up as it is written. But to me, it's pretty clear that the very same ideology that conquered the West and colonized all these lands is the great-great-grandpappy of that very cultural strain that has allowed a powerful and vocal subset of our population to be totally fine with wrecking the climate for a little extra cash flow, baby. Like, we've got to imagine ourselves as being in a boat. All different types of people in a really big boat. The boat starts sinking, but we've got ways to fix it. Unfortunately, heads like Rush Limbaugh started to convince all the angry white guys on the boat that the boat isn't actually sinking. It's just the blacks and the socialists and the hippies and the Mexicans telling you that it's sinking because they hate boats and they don't want you to enjoy your nice boat ride. But regardless of the lies that they've internalized, the boat is still sinking, and it's taking us all down with it. So what's the best option? Sit around and tweet about how you're not like the other guys that are denying that the boat is f***ed? Or maybe start thinking about ways to reach them, to persuade them, to invite them in, to invent a story that they can see themselves as being a part of, to create a story that they can believe in. So you're making too much noise. And that they can see themselves as playing a part in. All of this is to say that cultural paradigms that allow for and enable environmental destruction are deeply colonial in their origins. And since we all rely on the environment, white people are starting to victimize their own damn selves in the same way that they've been victimizing everybody else. And with that, we're going to introduce a new regular segment called Now, if there's anything that I know about the internet, it's that sometimes people misinterpret. So, this is the first iteration of what is definitely going to be a recurring segment called I am not saying that the only reason that we should care about environmental issues is because it's going to begin adversely affecting white people, or that we need to save white people at the expense of non-white people, or that white communities should receive more attention in environmental struggles than non-white communities, or that we should prop up the structures of white racism for the sake of environmental preservation, or that we should placate white racism for expedient ends. Obviously, I don't think that. So, if you somehow gleaned that from everything that I just said, you're wrong. Now, back to our show. Therefore, in this way, I see these vestigial paradigms of colonial extraction and entitlement as straight up thought poison that have a nasty habit of then manifesting into our water and our air and White supremacy, in all of its grand and insidious ways, carries unrepentant ecocide as one of its central tenets. And as such, we as white people, who have largely benefited from these ecocidal paradigms, in order to aid in the liberation of our non-white comrades and ourselves, must then turn our focus onto those among us that still cling to these ideas. Ideas which are quite manifestly hurting them. Ideas which are causing them suffering, and which will surely visit that suffering unto their descendants. And so, colonization is, on one hand, an irrefutable reality. But on the other hand, it is also a state of mind. For what is society, what is the state, but a state of mind writ large? This one, obviously isn't only directed at white people, though I'm sure Republicans would like it to be that way. But this is just a friendly reminder to f***ing vote. Really, it's simple. It only happens every few years, and it's really worth your time. If you value civil rights, if you value the courage of Black American leaders, if you value the life of every person that has ever died beneath the boot of an authoritarian regime, then honor them and f***ing vote. Not voting in your elections because it's inconvenient for you is like the most white privilege shit you could possibly do. So just do it. Just f***ing vote. Also, pay attention to your local politics. Educate yourself on local environmental issues. Learn about the players in them and follow what's happening with them. Go raise hell at some city council meetings and feel really empowered about that shit. I recently have tried to make a hobby out of writing really angry emails to my Republican representatives, telling them that I'm a Republican that is extremely unhappy with their environmental record. And I've got to say, it's really fun. You're not going to change the world with your hopes and prayers. Get out there and get shit done. Lastly, and this one is really important, know who your enemy is. Your enemy is not the poor and uneducated ignorant redneck that has been conned his whole life into voting against his own interests because he thinks that the blacks are going to get healthcare or something. Your enemy is not some misguided white kid on a college campus who doesn't understand all of the nuances of gender theory. Oh my goodness. This kid, who has never been exposed to these ideas in his life, just asked me to explain them to him. Instead of taking this opportunity to talk to him and practice healthy communication about challenging topics, I'm just going to spend my evening making him feel like a terrible person on Twitter for not already being as woke as me. That'll enrich the discourse. Your enemy is not your racist uncle who thinks that climate change is a China hoax. Your enemies are not those who have been duped and tricked into fear and hatred and self-deceit. Your enemies are those who have knowingly cultivated these lies, these fears. The dividers, the bad faith actors. Those whose default setting is to obfuscate, to equivocate, to muddy the waters. Those who would tell you that climate change isn't a big deal, that it's all hype, that it's all a trick. Those with a platform, with influence, with power. If you ally yourself with the biosphere, then those who use their power to perpetuate extractive colonizer paradigms are those that you should consider your adversaries. Your enemies are the ideas that enable, encourage, and justify ecocide, and those that profit from the perpetuation of these ideas. Your enemy is the poison of white supremacist structures. Your enemies are those that rob the heritage of your unborn descendants, those that would deny your grandchildren their birthright to a livable, clean earth. Do not waver in remembering who your enemies are, or let them trick you into thinking that it's someone else, or get so bogged down in petty Twitter squabbles and infighting that you find yourself losing your perspective. It's what they want you to do. Now, where were we? Fucking banjo, man.